We are now live on YouTube with the July 29th meeting of the Node.js modules team. We are joined by 8 individuals on this call. We have a pretty full agenda today. For those who are in the meeting, I will drop a link to the meeting doc inside of the chat. If you could please help with taking notes, it would be greatly appreciated. The first item that we have on the agenda today is policy conditions, which is from Node.js/Node 34414. Brad, is it safe to assume that you are the best person to take this item?
Yep.
I'm going to mute, and please take it from here.
So we have basically 2 points relevant to the modules working group here. While going and updating policies to integrate against a bunch of the new features that we landed this year for modules, we're trying to land conditions, and I noticed we use different prefixes for the internal scheme for built-ins. Policies use node : and the loaders use Node.js : I think we should align these. I personally slightly prefer just node : that's one of the issues, just if we can align which of the two we want to align with. And then the other is while implementing tests for this, we don't actually share a lot of our exports traversal code between locations, and we should probably figure out how we want to share it. I looked at extracting the CommonJS exports traversal for how you do searching within a package JSON exports, but it was pretty tied tightly together. And it's using some throws rather than return values to jump around in slightly odd ways to my eye. So we should figure that out. So those are the 2 issues. Do we have any thoughts on changing this scheme? Do we have a preference besides mine?
Yeah, my hand is up. I don't have a strong preference between Node or Node.js. I could see people preferring less characters. I guess the like 2 things that I personally care about here would be one, that it is consistent, and I'm really glad that you're digging this up. And then 2, although we have not really dug into this too much yet, I would love us to think about maybe this being something that could build on supporting built-in modules. I know that's still like only stage 2 over at TC39, so it may be premature for us to explore it, but that's absolutely something that I would love to see us digging into again. Back to you, Brad.
I think, Jan, you're next.
Okay, in the standards process. Yeah, I think when the discussion, I think we might even in the loader initially have used node : if I remember correctly, the reason why it was changed was because there were discussions about using a protocol for built-in modules. And in that context, there were a lot of concerns about Node being too generic, potentially, as a protocol, and too much of a risk that some other thing might be using Node as an actual like networking or addressing scheme, whereas Node.js has a much lower risk of colliding with pre-existing uses of Node as a protocol. Since protocols are often applied to networks and Node is a very common term in networks, it feels risky to pick Node.
I would be surprised. Nobody has registered that. I know that. Because I did write it originally as Node, which is why I was surprised when I updated things. To be clear, I think JS itself is a little odd to include if we're also targeting potentially becoming a Language runtime. I understand history of the project, but if we're calling things JS and they're not loading JS, that seems odd to me. Basically, I'm just asking, are there any objections with that PR to also alter the Node JS loader code to be Node? That would be a breaking change for people who have implemented loaders and use that. We could also support both temporarily.
Yeah, I guess just one thing there. Since loaders are experimental, I think that a change to that extent, albeit it might be better for to alias it with a warning, for example, for 12 or 14 or something like that. I do think a breaking change like that is totally in scope for the current stability of loaders. And Jan has their hand up. Sorry for interrupting.
I think Jordan.
I think my hand was still up from last time. So
yeah. So just to clarify, Bradley, your PR switches the Node.js's to Node, or the other way around?
It currently does not. It currently just does not align policies with loaders.
So if we wanted alignment, what would your PR do?
That is what we're discussing right now.
Okay, we're actually picking.
Eventually, yeah, I would prefer we eventually move only to one, and I'd prefer that one be Node : But since this is a breaking change, I think it would be fine to support both in the intermediate term. We did something similar when we added the get format hook for loaders, where we did support the old workflow as well.
Okay, so then, yeah, thank you for clarifying. And then my position is like that colloquially, like the binary is called Node. It's referred to as Node. I only see it written out as Node.js when people have apt installed it from the default Ubuntu repository. I would prefer Node, and I'm not super concerned about the risk that Jan's talking about, because these aren't URLs that are expected to work outside of Node. And I don't expect that we'd have like blockchain node or Tor node or WebRTC node URLs to worry about.
Also, for what it's worth, my understanding is that I think it's IANA where we could put in like a request to standardize the protocol. But the last that I checked, Node : was not a registered protocol, so we very well could go through the process of registering it, and then then it's on other people, not us, if they choose to overload it.
That sounds like a great path.
Jan, did you put your hand up again?
Yes. Just to clarify, my concern was not that I personally think that Node would be a dangerous protocol. My concern is that people have spoken up in the discussions about built-in modules and using namespacing for supporting built-in modules in require statements and in import statements. And in that context, they have spoken up against Node.js. And what I'm concerned about is that, yes, we can make decisions here about the loader API, but if then the loader API uses a protocol that wider Node then objects to using in import specifiers, that would be my concern. Like if we choose Node, then that would have to be also supported in require, for example, I think, if we go down that path.
So putting up my hand here, Jan, I don't disagree with you. I actually think that, and Jordan had a pull request a while back about this, and I think that there was a lot of debate about like what the mechanism would be, what it would look like, what the string would be. There has been some movement on the built-in modules proposal at TC39 since then. It's gotten to stage 2, and as far as I know, they are looking at moving forward with protocols. I think that it was like, we were talking about whether or not it would be a scope or a protocol or different ways of doing it. I think that if other folks within this group and within Node do not object to using a protocol for the purpose of namespacing Node, and we're okay with moving forward with like supporting that protocol, even if it's not the exact syntax that the language lands on for using built-ins. I don't know why we wouldn't just move forward with it. I could see though why people would be okay with it landing inside of loaders, which is like its own custom kind of side thing, and not in like the main script tags if we're unsure about whether or not there'll be long-term support for that protocol syntax. For what it's worth, I think that we should time box this at another 3 minutes if there's more discussion to be had.
I think I'm just going to move forward with not keeping it aligned, and I'll make a separate PR to align them. We had a second thing where do we have a clear refactoring that we want to do to get all the loaders to share the exports traversal? Is anybody actually working on that? If not, that'll be a separate PR that I'll work on later. It'll be a fairly hefty refactor though.
I don't
Doesn't
know.
sound like there's anyone.
Jan, is your hand up from before? Or did you put it up? Brad, I'm not aware of any refactors having in that space. The only thing that I would want to like encourage before we do more major refactors is sitting back, looking at 14 and looking at 12 and trying to ensure that like as much as possible, we can backport all these changes that we're looking at making. Or at least
I
backport
can
over.
already. If the concern is backporting, we should not do the refactor in that timeline. It will not land cleanly.
Well, I mean, I don't think it even matters if it lands cleanly. I think it's more like 12 is going to go into maintenance in October, and that's fine. I think we probably want to sit down and do a quick evaluation of the feature gaps between 12 and 14 that we have right now and what we're expecting to land in 15, and try to figure out like, what can we backport? What can't we backport? What features are in flight that we want to land that we do want to backport? And if we're going to do a very large refactor, perhaps wait until a few things land and backport before we start moving a lot of things around.
That seems fine. You can just make a meeting whenever you want, and I'll join. That's all for this issue.
Cool. Anyone else have anything to add for this for right now, or are we ready to go to the next one? Okay, cool. So the next topic we have here is modify get format and get source loader hooks. If I recall, Julian, this is yours and you presented it last meeting. Is there anything more or new to talk about since the last time we discussed this?
Hi everyone. Yeah, I'm here to update from the last meeting. I was asked to kind of dig into it more in terms of what are some alternatives, other ways we can go about it, maybe pros and cons to this method. And on the PR is also asked, or it was proposed by Guy Bedford about wouldn't allowing transform source, the fourth hook, to have the same kind of behavior, add consistency. So just here to kind of update on the exploration that I've done there, alternatives and to that concern too. So you could see in the PR the document with kind of an exploration of alternatives, and with the first alternative there being the one my PR kind of implements, which is the kind of optional format and get source. And I think it's something that after exploring further into, for example, the loader chaining PR, I think it's compatible with that, with some work there, but it's definitely kind of conceptually compatible. To answer Guy's question or concern about maybe transform source should be something that has the same behavior, I think kind of that should stay outside the scope of this PR for now. I think it's kind of, it would go against the intended behavior of transform source. And so keeping the behavior in this PR kind of as is, I think would be the way to go for now. So what I'm asking for now is, I guess, some further thoughts after looking maybe at the exploration I've done and seeing if I can move on to maybe updating documentation on this and moving forward there.
I don't remember what I sent you. What was it? Oh, I just sent you, I wrote the doc and I shared it with my bosses. I just sent you a copy of the text.
Is this a different phone call, Miles? Okay.
Is Miles in an office? I'm kind of jealous now.
No, he said he had to step away for a minute, but he didn't mute, so that was the confusion. It's all clear. Oh, so we want somebody else to moderate. So do we have anything we want to say about this hook change? No hands are up.
Yeah, I think the question is,
Okay,
are there
let's
fundamental concerns about moving forward with the PR?
There are currently no hands up, and it's been a little while, so I'd say we move on. There are no concerns from this group. Okay, let's hop on to the next one. Special treatment for package JSON resolution and exports. Who wants to take this? I believe this is the one that exposes package JSON by default within a package boundary so that you don't have to include it in exports. Do we have anything we want to say on this? Nobody wanted to pick it up? Last comment
At the
looks to be...
At the last meeting, we discussed a bit about the an API on module to get a package directory, which would provide a blessed path for tools that need access to the package JSON and sort of obviate the need for exposing it by default. So I think that my recollection is that we were going to move forward with evaluating a PR for that. And I had volunteered to work with Miles to write that.
I believe there is a PR that came out in the past couple days.
Oh,
somewhere.
Well, okay.
So we'll
if you could
just
link to that,
follow
that
up,
would be great.
figure that out. I will. Somebody else take over. Do the next topic.
Yeah, I can do that. Is this topic done for now? We're good to go to the next one. So the next one that we
The
have
package JSON, yeah,
is 33416, which is CJS exports detection. Guy, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, I can do that. So I think last time the sort of ongoing discussion around this PR has been how to get around objections to landing it. We tried with a flag, and then I think last time the discussion was that we would try enabling it through a loader instead, and allow named exports from CommonJS using loaders. So I posted a PR that basically enables that to be done in a sound way without interference from Node.js internals, which otherwise would stop this from being possible. So that's, I'll just post it in the chat now. It's this PR. And it's got one approval right now. It's 7 days. So I'll probably aim to land that a little later this afternoon, unless anyone else has some more feedback on that PR. And with that PR, I also put together a loader example. I haven't published it to NPM just because I don't want to maintain it, but a loader example of a loader that can do this named export support exactly as in the PR. So it's the WASM-based parser. that'll detect the exports. So people can try it out in user land, like they would have if we landed it behind a flag through this loader. Obviously, if no one shares it or publicizes it, no one will test it and we'll get no feedback, and we'll never have any feedback to determine if we want to land the core version of this functionality. But it could still be used as a data point towards that, possibly. Otherwise, I think it's, yeah, likely just going to let things lie on the other PRs, otherwise, as discussed last time.
Yeah, I just want to voice support for this. I do want to do some various follow-up PRs afterwards, but this PR seems like a good step. We haven't seen much desire to keep the snapshotting behavior, to my knowledge, in the ecosystem. There is some theoretical purity there, and if people want to enable that, there are various ways we can add other hooks or functionality to allow them to do it. So yeah, those will be the follow-ups. That's all.
Wesley, last meeting you did voice some concern about named exports. Have you had any more time to think about that? I mean,
just that, like, the community expects them by and large. Like publish the custom loader in the community and see if it's worth shipping in core raises an eyebrow to me, because the community has been using named exports through custom loaders for years already. So I don't think we need more data points in that regard. But
Right. So, but the problem is that we have core objection to the parsing approach specifically.
Yeah, what I'm getting at is that publishing it as a third-party loader isn't actually going to get through any of those core objections. It's just going to be a third-party loader forever. That's the pessimism I have here.
Right, but there could be a path there if this was something that you cared about strongly enough to use feedback from that user land loader to say that coming from a TypeScript perspective, this is working for the ecosystem as far as you're concerned, and strongly support it in core, because ultimately, if it were to land in core, it does require some strong someone to advocate for it strongly, and so that there is still a role that this public loader could be used to do that, and I would strongly recommend you to do that if you care about this, because it does seem like you're the person here who cares about it the most.
Yeah, and what I would also add is that the thing that people have been using in userland is not this. So
that's the wrong way to think about it. Absolutely, and I've said that the entire time, but that's okay. That's okay.
But that makes your argument of so we don't need further proof not quite as convincing, because that is the exact objection that some people had on that PR, is that it does not exactly replicate the behavior that the ecosystem has been using. So getting some evidence that people find this reduced behavior still valuable and it does actually work out in practice would maybe help convince some people that it could land in core, even though it is just a heuristic and is not 100% covering all observable properties on the exports object.
If I can, I guess I can just go next. If I can just give an update. I've been working on a repo to test the PR against core, the one that's in a flag. And I've been really swamped lately. So if anyone has any time to help with that effort, I would really appreciate the help. But the latest thing I've been doing is trying to update it to try to figure out from like packages readmes what the intended public APIs are. Well, like if they even intend to have named exports, like do they suggest that users do destructuring of common.js, or do they have an example of an import statement in their README, et cetera, to try to narrow this down so that, because like basically what we have is that this PR seems like it's like whatever, only 66% successful or something like that, based on just comparing pure all the things that we find off the common.js exports object against what this detects in ESM. But the situation is actually a lot better than that, because like a lot of those are just like superfluous or not intended to be public and so on and so forth. So I've been trying to find ways to programmatically determine like what do I think the intended public API is for a particular package, and then are those named exports detected? And I'm still working on that. So yeah, Wes, if you or anyone else has time to help with this effort, or if someone wants to go through manually, like define what the expected named exports are for 50 packages or 100 packages or however many people want to go through, then we can kind of get a realistic kind of success rate. And I think that's the blocker, or that's what Gus is using to block. He's like, he wants, a success rate of over 90% or 90 something percent. And then he'll be like, okay, fine, this is good enough, and we'll let it land. So yeah, I know this is sort of like defining the conditions to back us into the desired success rate, but I think these are the right conditions we should use for evaluating this, because it's really about user expectations, about when they type an import statement with a named import, do they expect it to work? And I think that's where this is ultimately going. So.
One good example is that for the ES module cases, like the Babel cases, it should have actually 100% accuracy on those because of the well-defined nature of those transforms.
And what about TypeScript?
We use essentially the same emitters Babel nowadays, so should be also 100% accurate.
It should be, yeah.
So that would be another thing. It'd be like, if there's some way there probably is some way to programmatically detect like this one was created through Babel or this one was created through TypeScript, and then be like, okay, for those cases it's 100%, and then blah blah blah. It's just a question of doing the research to fine tune the algorithm that evaluates each package and to get these good statistics. But I think I have a good feeling that like, if we do the work to make the testing code, find those stats, that we'll get good enough stats that it'll overcome the block. So
is there maybe someone involved in TypeScript at all who'd be interested in helping with this? Or is there any way we could possibly reach out, or any lists you'd recommend to discuss this on?
I mean, the best place for TypeScript discussions at this point is actually probably the Discord server, the community Discord.
If you want to give me a link,
Sure.
I can maybe post something there, or if you want to post something there to link to the PR that I started, yeah, that would be great.
I'd just like to note there is a well-defined edge case with export from where it doesn't round trip properly in either Babel or TypeScript, but that's known.
I mean, there are going to be edge cases. I mean, I can talk about it better than I can, but at least I think the only objection is Gus, and I think he's not demanding like, perfect purity, because I think we've ruled out all the potential ways to get perfect purity from the whole, all the other CGS approaches like dynamic and out of order, et cetera, that have been banged around for years now. So since those have been ruled out, I think at least Gus might be slightly flexible on not requiring that. I don't know of any other options besides parsing at this point. So,
I mean, that could be one way to restrict it, is if we need 100%, say, we will make it work 100% on sources that are 100% known to be transpiled TypeScript or transpiled with Babel. But we could actually check maybe for the ES module or something and only do the exports detection in those cases. Maybe that would get past Gus's concern with anything sort of not being perfectly defined as well. So that could be an option.
One thing well, two things I would add is I do think that Gus was asking for 100%. I think Gus was asking for something that is not likely to break for handwritten code in the face of refactorings. I think that was his principal objection. So I'm not sure if a percentage that is high enough would necessarily overcome his objection unless he just changes his mind. But I think in the same vein that Guy just mentioned, it might be interesting to look at more aggressive bailing. So to say that if there is anything where we see patterns that might lead to additional values on the exports object, it being passed into functions we don't understand, or it being looped with dynamic keys, or anything, are we bailing out in those cases? Or
To be blunt,
would that potentially?
I don't think speculating on the success criteria of getting it past Gus is useful without actually talking to Gus.
Right. I'm not saying that we should definitely do something. I'm saying that assuming that this is this success criteria that he is setting, would this be a potential argument? Have we explored it yet? In preparation to discussing it with Gus. We need to discuss it with Gus, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like, sorry, it does sound like a viable route to get 100%. So, you know, if the argument is that if there's something a user can do without realizing and change their exports, or if it's not going to be completely accurate, we can get past both of those arguments perfectly fine by saying we specifically detect transpiled sources. Obviously, that detection can't be 100%. But if we bail out anything that's not got ES module, looks like a transpiled source, we will have 100% on those sources. We might overclassify, but I don't think there's an argument against overclassification. I think the argument is against underclassification at any level. So that would ensure we never underclassify. But yeah, help testing and moving this forward would be great. I mean, I pushed like 3 proposals now for this stuff, and yeah, it's been a lot. Shall we move on? We've lost Miles again, our moderator. The next topic, is everyone happy to move on? If anyone's not, we can continue to discuss this. Okay.
Yeah,
so,
I just really quick, not to argue a position, but I feel like I've remembered Gus saying specifically that he's not concerned really with transpiled code because those folks are the ones that are likely to update, like, and make changes. But that he seems, I recall him being more concerned about old code that conceptually has named exports, but might never be updated, and a desire to make those work. So it's great if we can get 100% on transpiled code, but
is that we would just not make them work, because his argument is we should either make it work or we should not make it work.
Okay.
So let's just not make it work in those cases, and only make it work for transpiled code where we know we can get 100%. And then obviously the next debate is over whether we are 100% detecting transpiled code.
Right.
But ES modules.
Thanks for clarifying.
Okay. I can try and push some discussions around that before the next meeting. The next one was kind of an open discussion. I just wanted to have what I've been noticing. I've been doing some PRs for the export field for packages, and one of the things I'm noticing is there's a lot of UI component libraries coming out these days that have ES modules, and sometimes so component libraries and SVG icon libraries. And some of them have hundreds of icons or hundreds of components where each of those is an individual module. So when defining these packages with the exports field, it's absolutely necessary to use the path exports where you're exporting all of the modules in a folder. Because to manually list, say, 200 components or 300 SVG icons of different sizes is just very untenable for those users. So what ends up happening is most users who define exports will probably define their exports explicitly and without file extensions. They'll define individual features. But then as soon as these component libraries want to define exports, they absolutely have to export entire folders and require their users to use file extensions. So the question was, are we happy with this idea that sometimes when doing package exports, you have file extensions, the JS extension or the MJS extension, and other times you don't? And what you're doing is just like with CommonJS today, down to what the package author's preference is and what they are allowing and reading the docs. And just wondering if we want to perhaps be allowing patterns where users don't, where users can always have extensions left off. And so the idea was if you had some kind of pattern system, you could include the extension for these, 100 separate module component libraries. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, if it's a concern, we are sometimes encouraging extensions and sometimes not. And if so, if we want to think about more complex proposals that can possibly mitigate that.
So, Jan, I don't know if you had your hand up first or I did. Okay. So this is so I agree with the desire, right? I think what you're asking, guys, should we have a way to make this easier? Yes. But we explicitly decided not to provide that when we didn't provide the node style resolution. In other words, what you're describing is what I've been advocating for years, which is humans don't want to see extensions in their code, but the choice of requiring explicit file extensions forces that, which means that we have explicitly forced, intentionally, people to make very, very long verbose exports maps, specifically to remove the cruft of extensions from their code. If we can come up with a way that is, that meets all the explicit and static desires that drove this current decision, but also allows those extensions to be omitted, I'm super on board with that. The exact proposal in that issue, I think, doesn't work because of what directory because there's some confusion around what the slash actually does. But some mechanism would be great. I never want any of my hundreds of packages to even allow people to use extensions when they import things. And so I write my exports maps that way. But I just wanted to remind everyone, this is the trade-off we chose by not allowing extension-based lookups.
Right, so it's worth bearing in mind that this is for ES module imports specifically. So CommonJS don't have this restriction.
Well, they do if there's an exports field, because I still have to, as soon as the exports field exists, you can no longer require anything unless I
support extension searching in the path exports for CommonJS explicitly. So yeah, in that case, it is
even when there's no slash provided.
When there is a slash provided.
Right. Yeah. So the slash one, that's what I'm saying. When the right hand side ends in a slash, then that's basically like hats off, right? Is that the CJS path gets the full range of node specifier lookups, and the ESM side gets only exact paths, right? But that means that as soon as you have that slash, you no longer have parallel APIs, and which means that if you care about having parallel APIs, then you're never going to use a slash at the end of the right-hand side, and you're always going to have to explicitly enumerate these things, which is, I think, the problem that you've run into, or that you've seen people run into, and it's certainly a problem I've run into. I have a package that doesn't have the exports field yet, but has 1,700 files exposed, and that's going to be a real long package JSON one day, and I would love a way to keep that shorter. without forcing people to dirty their code with file extensions. So I'm on board with the desire. I just am kind of like, I feel like we've intentionally boxed ourselves into this corner.
Can you just clarify again what your concern was? Sorry, Jan. I just want to hear from Jordan exactly what his concern was that he's said about the current proposal, and then if you can answer.
Well, it's that the slash at the end of the right-hand side already means do the normal thing for your module system. And you're proposing, I believe, a slash at the end of the left-hand side. And, or some globs or something in there as well, something like that. And that, to me, that just creates kind of confusion because I have to keep a lot more in my head when I'm trying to look at a complex exports field to figure out what it does. So it's maybe it will work. It feels like the wrong solution to me, and I would rather use like some alternative mechanism.
A better way to distinguish it on the left-hand side that what you're doing is some kind of pattern as opposed to a normal path export.
Right, like the current mental model is that everything on the left-hand side is the exact thing, the exact subpath under the package name that appears in someone's code, and except for when the right-hand side ends in a slash, because that's the escape hatch, and that is now going to be made more complex with your current proposal here. Like okay. It's still static, and a computer can still figure it out, but I think it makes it harder for a human to figure it out.
Let's come back to the specific proposals in a second, cool. And then Jan, if you wanted to voice what you were going to say.
Yeah, kind of Guy might have heard this one, but I think that today people don't want to see file extensions in their code, and that is correct, and that is based on a decade of precedent and practices and what people are used to. What I'm wondering, though, is whether it will be true in a decade. Because if people, big if, start writing browser-compatible code, they will be used to writing extensions. Because if you want to have a simple setup that runs your code in the browser, if you want to write ES modules that actually run in the browser, you are generally using extensions as a very general rule.
That's if you have no build process, though.
That is if, like, for example, people like the Polymer ecosystem, not the most populous, but it exists, are definitely, or people like Snowpack that are focusing a lot on, hey, can we make it possible to actually make use of the fact that browsers implemented modules natively and actually run them. So in that world, there is not necessarily a build system, or at least it's a minimal build system. And specifier rewrites might not become, over time, as common as they are today. So people might become used to writing specifiers with file extensions for everything in the project, which they currently do not for everything relative in Node and in Webpack using stacks. So it is a question whether in that world, bare specifiers not having extensions would actually feel natural, or whether that actually then sticks out as, it's weird. For everything relative, I'm using the file extensions, but then I'm not using file extensions for everything coming from a package. Right now, it's using the same pattern for both. But in that new world, actually potentially writing file extensions for your bare specifiers isn't really that weird. But that is very speculative, obviously.
Right. And to me, that sounds like an argument for supporting both easily, like making both ergonomic, as opposed to forcing one or the other. And at the moment, we're forcing one to try to drive to that speculative world.
Also, this is where I point out that everybody directly requires packages, and package names aren't extensions. I don't. That's arbitrary resolution anyway. It's just a redirect.
So would you put two in support of better ergonomics here? I'll take that as abstain.
I think I'm up next if you're done, Jan.
Please, someone else moderate. I can't
I'll
actually see hands here for some reason.
Yeah. So I do really like the idea of having templates and things of that nature. Sometimes you want to do some kind of odd skips around in directory structures I've seen before. I think there's definitely work to be done on the exact implementation, but there's a corollary with the file extensions where you can't always update the specifier things are imported by. I think we can all agree if you get a reasonable usage, not all of your consumers will update willingly or ever to a new specifier, regardless of if you use package extensions or not. I think we shouldn't be trying to pass judgment on what the future will be. If we were to include a file extension by force, for example, then if we get to things where we can redirect to a different format, which you can do with the exports field, you don't have to match the specifier with the eventual target. So you could be loading, foo/bar.js, but really be loading WASM, even JSON files. And we get into a very awkward position if we don't start prepping for this, especially with import assertions. They used to be called, what was it? Import
It was first
conditions?
attributes and then conditions and now
Module
assertions.
attributes. Yeah. So we're getting to the point where we're actually adding metadata to the import site. And we're going to need to start figuring out how we're going to pass that metadata through to these static resolution systems. And so some form of templating probably needs to occur. And regardless of if we enforce that it must have a file extension, this is also affected because if we were to do that redirect from a .js specifier to, say, a .json file, the import assertion would fail if you tried to assert that you're actually loading JavaScript, because you would actually be loading JSON. And so I don't think we should state we know what the future is. And I think we should actually make this much more flexible because there's kind of a world of pain coming, is my imagination, from various other metadata being attached to module resolution that's coming in the pipeline. So that's all.
Jan, did you still have your hand up there?
Sorry, taking notes means I completely forget clicking that button. Nope.
So just to very briefly go into the specific proposal then, the reason why I didn't include a wildcard on the left-hand side, to match the wildcard replacement on the right-hand side, was that if you have both that and path exports, there's possibly some ambiguity between which one is meant to be selected with higher precedence, whereas by making them the same key, that it avoids that whole problem. But perhaps if that precedence is just carefully defined, then a wildcard pattern on both sides that match up would be graded.
Or an active error, right, would also be possible.
Yeah, if we then again define the conflict case and what it means to conflict, because at the moment, for example, path exports have precedence over each other. You can have a nested path that's more that overrides a higher level path, and then how does that interact with wildcards and things like that? But we can, I mean, this proposal is very much, like I said, we are interested in pursuing these kinds of ideas while we still have a window for it. we could have those discussions separately and try to maybe flesh some of that out a bit more and see if we can come up with something that might make sense. Unless anyone has strong objections or concerns at this stage to not pursue that.
Jan?
One quick thing that I forgot to bring up is the one property we risk losing with this is that that we are no longer statically convertible to what is currently proposed as import maps. Meaning, if you want to convert the wildcard prefixing to a currently proposed import map, there is no static way of doing it without scanning the file tree, which we may or may not care about, but just mentioning it.
That is basically, I mean, the trade-off we made is that, unless we can convince import maps to add some more logicful features to statically configure a dynamic import map, or like a dynamically generated import map, then like we're tying ourselves to something that requires excessive boilerplate for anything complex. And that's just, we have to make that decision. Do we couple ourselves to that, or do we, allow for ergonomics for package authors and, make the tooling have to do slightly more work to generate the import map?
Just to be clear, this does not make any searching on the disk actually occur. It's just rewriting specifiers.
Right, but the problem is that that the current rewrite cannot be expressed by an import map without creating an entry for every possible matching file, because the import map doesn't have a wildcard concept. So if you want to express that rewrite, you have to generate the import map, you have to scan the file system to know what the actual mappings will look like so that you can generate the import map.
Hey all, I'm sorry, quick point of order. We've got 1 minute left until the end of this meeting. Are people ready to move on for right now and call it? Or is there a need to kind of keep the discussion going over time?
I think we have work to do on that PR, but it's offline.
Okay, cool. So sorry for stopping the party so abruptly, but I would like us to keep to our timeline. Thanks everyone for joining today. Let's try to get work done asynchronously through the issue tracker and pick this up again in 2 weeks. Gonna go ahead and stop the stream.